Dust rose from the crate as Mara's boots hit the wood, and every eye in the square turned to look at her, waiting to see if she would cry. She did not cry. Instead, she stood up straight, lifted her chin, and stared right back at the crowd of men who had come to buy a wife. Someone laughed. A rancher near the front spat tobacco juice into the dirt and said, "That one's too proud for her own good." Another man chuckled and shook his head, sure she would fetch no bid at all with a look like that on her face. Mara heard them. She let them talk. She did not lower her eyes. The year was 1878, and Widow's Bend smelled of cattle dust, hot leather, and the sweat of men who worked the land hard. The sun beat down on tin roofs and dry wood porches. Somewhere a rooster crowed, ignorant of the fear thick in the air. Women in bonnets whispered behind gloved hands. Men leaned on hitching posts, chewing tobacco, sizing up the girl on the crate like she was a horse at market. Mara Colton had buried her father 2 winters back. Her mother followed him into the ground that spring, taken by fever. Now the bank wanted the house, and Mara had nothing left to sell but herself. The auctioneer, an old man with a voice like gravel, called out her age, her health, her ability to cook and sew. Mara's fists tightened at her sides, but her face stayed calm as still water. Then from the back of the crowd, a rancher shouted a low price, mocking her. A few men laughed again. Mara's chin lifted higher. She did not beg. She did not look away. Instead, she looked each man in the eye, one by one, slow and steady, like she was judging them instead of the other way around. The crowd went quiet. Nobody expected that. A woman on the auction crate was supposed to look down, look scared, look small. Mara looked like a woman who had already survived worse than this square full of strangers. That was when a man in a long black coat stepped forward from the shadows near the feed store. He said nothing. His hat hid his eyes. He simply raised one gloved hand. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up. "We got us a bid, folks." The stranger did not haggle. He paid double what anyone expected, cash in hand, without a single word of explanation. The whole square fell into stunned silence. Then whispers broke out like wildfire. Near a hitching post, Jesse Hawthorne stood frozen, his empty pockets useless in his hands, his heart pounding harder than it ever had before. Mara looked at the silent stranger, and for the first time that day, fear finally crept into her steady eyes. The fire cracked and popped as Mr. Hendricks threw another letter into the flames, and Mara watched the paper curl black without him ever reading a single word. She stood in the doorway, a feather duster still in her hand, and said nothing. She had learned by now that questions in this house went unanswered. The ranch sat far past 3 creeks and a lonely mesa, so far that town felt like a memory instead of a place. The house itself was grand, built of good timber with glass windows that caught the prairie sun, but it held a strange chill inside its walls, like laughter had once lived there, and then died a long time ago. Mara's boots echoed on the wood floors. Her own voice sounded too loud in the empty halls. Weeks had passed since the auction. Mr. Hendricks gave her silk dresses. He gave her roast beef and warm bread every night. But he rarely looked at her, and when he spoke, his words came out careful and flat, like a man walking on thin river ice. One afternoon, while dusting his desk, Mara's hand brushed against a small locket tucked behind his ledger books. She opened it before she could stop herself. Inside was a woman's photograph, old and yellow at the edges. The woman's face looked so much like Mara's own that a cold shiver ran down her spine. Footsteps sounded behind her. She turned, the locket still open in her palm. "Who is this?" she asked, holding it up. Mr. Hendricks's face turned the color of ash. He crossed the room in 3 fast steps and snatched the locket from her fingers, closing his fist around it like a wound. "That is not your concern, Mrs. Hendricks," he said, his voice sharp as a blade. Mara stepped back, her heart hammering. That night, for the first time, she turned the small iron key in her bedroom door before she slept. She began to notice more. Letters arrived addressed to names she did not know, names that were not his and not hers. Late at night, she heard his boots packing the hallway floor, back and forth, and low mutterings that made no sense through the thick wood door. Fear grew inside her like a weed nobody had planted, but nobody could pull out either. Miles away in Widow's Bend, Jesse Hawthorne could not stop thinking of her. He rode near the Hendricks ranch more than once, always keeping his distance, always watching for smoke rising from the chimney, some small proof that she still breathed, still lived, still was. One evening, he found the old auctioneer at the saloon and asked him straight, "What do you know of this Hendricks fellow, truly?" The old man's face went grim and quiet. "Heard tell he had a wife before, out in Kansas territory. Folks say she disappeared. Nobody ever did find her." Jesse's blood turned to ice in his veins. He was on his horse within the hour, riding hard toward the ranch, toward Mara, toward whatever truth waited for him. Their thunder cracked like a rifle shot overhead, and Mara's hand froze on the door latch as boots pounded up the porch steps through the pouring rain. She threw the door open before the second knock could land. Jesse stood there, soaked through to the bone, his hat dripping, his horse trembling and lathered white behind him in the yard. Relief broke across Mara's face like sunlight cracking through storm clouds. "Jesse," she breathed, "what are you doing here?" "I had to see you were safe." He stepped past her into the front room, rainwater pooling at his boots on the good wood floor. "Mara, listen close. There's talk in town, talk of a wife before you, one who vanished out in Kansas territory and was never found." Mara's hands began to shake. She had felt that same cold fear crawling under her skin for weeks now, in the burned letters, in the locked locket, in the packing footsteps at night. She had told herself she was only imagining shadows where none stood. Now she knew she had not been imagining anything at all. The study door slammed open. Mr. Hendricks filled the frame, his face twisted dark with fury at finding a cowboy dripping rainwater onto his floor. "Get out of my house," he said, each word cold as the storm outside. "She is my wife." Jesse did not move. Fear pricked up his spine like needles, but his boots stayed planted where they were. "I'm not leaving until she tells me herself that she's safe here, until I hear it from her own mouth." "You know nothing of my life, boy," Hendricks snapped, his composure cracking like river ice under a boot heel. His eyes darted toward the window, toward the door, like a cornered animal looking for a way out. But Jesse paid him no mind at all. He turned fully toward Mara, and in that storm-lit room, with the windows rattling from thunder, he asked her the question that would split the whole night wide open. "Mara," he said, quiet and steady despite the storm howling outside, "did you marry him because you wanted to, or because you felt you had no other choice?" The room went silent. Even the rain seemed to hold its breath against the windowpane. Mara looked first at the stranger, at his wild and cornered eyes, at a man unraveling before her. Then she looked at Jesse, soaked and shivering, who had ridden through a raging storm not out of duty, but out of love plain and simple. Tears rose hot in her eyes as the truth broke loose at last, a truth she had swallowed down for weeks out of fear and duty both. "I had no choice," she whispered, her voice cracking like the thunder outside. "I never had a choice, not from the very first day." The words hung heavy in the room, and nobody moved, waiting to see what would happen next. Mr. Hendricks's shoulders dropped like a man who had carried a boulder for years and finally set it down, and he sank into his chair without a fight left in him. Nobody spoke. The rain still tapped against the window glass, softer now, like the storm itself was listening. "My name is not truly Hendricks," he said at last, his voice hollow as an empty well. "My real wife died of fever back in Kansas territory. I could not stand the loneliness after. When I heard of the bride auctions, I thought if I found a woman who looked enough like her, the pain might finally stop." Mara's fear, though still fresh, softened into something closer to pity. "You bought me to replace a ghost," she said quietly, not with anger but with sad understanding. Yes, tears finally rolled down his weathered cheeks, years of grief breaking free all at once. And I am sorry. I never meant you harm, Mara. I only meant to fill an emptiness that nothing on this earth could ever fill. Jesse stepped forward, his voice firm but not cruel. She is not a ghost, and she is not property to be bought. She is a woman who deserves to choose her own path in this life. Mr. Hendricks nodded slowly, a broken man, not a wicked one, only a man crushed under grief he had never properly mourned. Then take her. I release her from this marriage. I never should have bought a bride to mend a heart that was never going to mend that way. Outside, the storm began to calm. Thunder rolled away into the far distance, fading like the last breath of an old nightmare, finally leaving the house for good. Mara stepped out onto the porch with Jesse close beside her, and the cool, rain-washed air filled her lungs like new life itself pouring in. "You came for me," she said softly, looking up into his face. "Through the storm, through the danger, not knowing what you might find waiting." Jesse took her hand gently, the same way he had helped her down from that auction crate weeks before. But this time, his touch carried no sorrow at all, only hope, steady and warm. "I could not let you face this alone, Mara," he said. "Not when my heart already belonged to you, long before that auction ever began." Above them, the clouds began to break apart, and stars peeked through the clearing sky one by one, like small lights lit just for them. Mara smiled through tears that were no longer only sad ones. She finally understood what true choosing meant. Not an auction crate, not a stranger's silver coin, but a heart given freely and a heart returned just the same. "Then let us go home, Jesse," she said, "truly home this time." Hand in hand, they rode back toward Widow's Bend together, leaving the silent house and its buried sorrows far behind them, riding instead toward a future built not on fear, but on a love that had waited patiently through every storm and every mile of hard road.